After the latest terror attack, this time in New York City, what will be the likely fallout, in particular its impact on Donald Trump's immigration policy? And now that Shinzo Abe has been re-elected as Prime Minister of Japan, what changes can we expect in both his domestic and foreign policies? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The New York City truck attack is the city's deadliest terror attack since 9/11. 8 people were killed and 12 others injured. Seyfullo Saipov, a 29-year-old Uzbekistan native, drove a truck into the pedestrian bike path just blocks from the site of the World Trade Center. Vehicle attacks are becoming more frequent around the world, including deadly incidents in Nice, Barcelona, London, Stockholm and Berlin. What can be done about this new method of terror attacks? And in his cabinet meeting, U.S. President Donald Trump called the suspect an animal and said that he intended to terminate the diversity visa lottery program, a system that grants permanent U.S. residency every year to some 50,000 immigrants by lucky draw. Considering Trump's previous travel ban policy, how will this attack affect America's immigration policy? To find out more, I'm joined in the studio by Yan Shuai, Associate Professor and Executive Chief of Organized Crime Studies at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, or CICIR, and in Washington by Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary of U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Douglas, let me come to you first. Now, according to New America, a nonpartisan research institution, there have been 15 vehicle attacks in the West by jihadist terrorists since 2014, killing a total of 142 people. Vehicle attacks have become increasingly frequent. Can traditional counterterrorism technologies or tactics be used for this new method involving everyday objects such as trucks?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very challenging, unfortunately. I mean, the most effective method will be trying to stop the perpetrators before they actually get into a vehicle. But as we saw on this horrible attack in New York, it doesn't take much. What could have possibly have stopped this is better education at the source. So this gentleman rented a U-Haul truck, and media reports seem to indicate that he filled in some derogatory information on that form. If the person renting that truck had paid more attention to, and by no means am I blaming the clerk at that store, but by paying more attention to some of the data on that and reporting it to authorities sooner, that could help stop it. But as we've seen, and as you indicated in the top of your comments, it is so easy just to take a truck and start driving it down a pedestrian way. It is one of the most difficult challenges. That being said, while Donald Trump made quite a statement about this, the reality is while tragic and horrible, and these poor 5 of the gentlemen killed were actually tourists from Argentina, I would have appreciated seeing him make these comments as aggressively after the shootings in Las Vegas, where far more people were shot and perhaps more things could have been done.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to watch this, and as the department likes to say, if you see something, say something to try to stop this. But I think rhetoric and finger-pointing isn't the way to stop it.
No. Well, in Chinese, we have a saying, when you have a headache, you treat your head. When you have footache, you treat your foot. But that's not going to solve the problem. Professor Yan, now New York City police actually has been tightening security measures before the attack happened. For instance, they already required more information for people who are renting cars. However, the attacker simply rented the truck in a neighboring state and drove it to New York. So it seems that technical means is having a limit, and either by investing in extremely high amount of police presence, which is going to be extremely expensive, or setting up restriction as widely as you can, people just have to maybe live with a certain amount of risks, just as they do with burglary. What is your thoughts on this?
I think New York City has the strongest counterterrorism measures since it was hit by 9/11 terror attacks in 2001, and also in order to tackling the truck terrorism, it has implemented some kind of car rental or security measures to inform the business to report to the police if they find something suspicious. But I think the truck terrorism is some kind of low-tech, low-cost terrorism. So this kind of terror attacks, in that terrorism, no bombing or no explosives or no weapon buying was involved. So in the preparation stage, there is very little chances that the suspect will leak some warning signs to the outsiders. And but I think there is more measures that the New York City can take. I think the first thing is that the New York City can put some concrete barriers in some public spaces to prevent the easy access of the vehicles. I think this measure has been taken by several European countries since they are targeted in recent 2 years. And another measure, I think, is to implement some high-tech technologies. I have been informed that in Sweden they are testing some kind of geo-fencing system. In this system, the satellite connects with the in-car computer. It will stop or slow down the car when the car enters some unauthorized areas.
Well, but you really need to have this kind of system for all trucks, for all vehicles. What if he found a bulldozer? Are you going to equip the bulldozer with this kind of technology? I mean, it's endless, you know, if you try to limit the kind of things people can use to attack people. Maybe, I don't know, my question really, Douglas, is there a more fundamental way to address this issue than, you know, trying to chase after the problems, chase after the causes when things already happen?
You know, it's a great question. I mean, the amazing thing about New York is their technological footprint. You know, if they had been able to get earlier warning about this gentleman having rented the vehicle, every vehicle that comes into New York is scanned. So they have license plate readers at all major points of entry. Tremendous number of cameras. You know, after London, there is no more city with more cameras than New York. So they have, you know, a tremendous capability to track and get early warning on things, but they need to have the data to get that early warning. You know, I do think that New York has put in all sorts of measures, you know, bollards in key and strategic places. But when it all comes down to it, if you have a sick individual who's willing to get behind a vehicle, suddenly swerve it, drive it up onto a sidewalk, you know, it's going to be very hard to stop. So,
yep.
You know, the question is, you know, how far up the chain, if you will, can they identify and target these individuals and try to take them into custody before they do it?
Yeah, that's why U.S. President...
No one would dispute that, you know, that...
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's why President Trump is talking about vetting future immigrants, you know, to kind of prevent the chances of terrorists coming into the country. However, again, this is a person that arrived in the United States in 2010, and he is said to have been radicalized within the United States. Is it really... but President Trump attacked the diversity visa lottering system, calling it sounding good, it's not nice, it's not good, it hasn't been good. Is it the right tree he's barking at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, let's just back up for 1 second. And the important thing is, even in that program, it's not as if a person put his name in a hat, it was pulled out, and they were immediately granted entry to the United States. They still have to go through the rigorous screening that happens. You know, the point that you make, which is absolutely accurate, is that at the time of his screening, nothing was identified. It was once he got here that he was radicalized. So that's the first thing I'd say. As to that program, that was actually signed into law by President Bush. You know, since that time, both Democrats and Republicans have looked at, you know, challenges with that program and have actually called it to be pulled back. So, you know, I think the challenge isn't so much as to who we're granting the visa, because they are doing a very solid job of vetting. It's what do they do once they get here? And, you know, that's something we have to watch very, very closely. I think where President Trump, you know, likes to gather his news from, you know, other networks that perhaps don't check the facts as much is a real challenge. You know, what we need to look through is fact-based analysis on how we keep an eye on those that we grant visas to, you know, how we provide the mechanisms in place to get earlier warning signs if they are being radicalized, and how we work within the communities here in the United States, particularly within the Arab community, where 99.9% are peace-loving, active, contributing members of American society, to help them, to support them, to incentivize them to better identify individuals like this, so that law enforcement can get them off the streets before they do a heinous crime like this.
Professor Yin, what's your thoughts on the immigration policy and its potential impact on the U.S.'s efforts to fight terrorism? Are we looking at the right path by scrapping this diversity visa lottery program? Anyway, immigrants coming into the United States already go through extreme vetting. I mean, what more extreme can it become in your eyes?
Yeah, I think the Trump administration put a lot of efforts in bringing new immigration policies in the United States. But I think the policies does not solve the problem in the first place, because most of the immigrants come to the United States, they are not terrorists. And actually, most of the terrorist cases in United States, there are domestic terrorists. They are radicalized in the United States. So maybe the Trump's new immigration policy may prevent some terrorists going into the United States, but they cannot prevent them being radicalized in United States. So I think what the Trump administration needs to do more is to look at the problem at the root and take some concrete measures to tackle the problems directly.
And Douglas Smith, what is your final thoughts on this, on what Professor Yin just said?
Well, I couldn't agree more with his last point. I mean, it really does come down to the mayors. One of the hot button issues here is a term we call sanctuary cities. And it is something that President Trump has been fighting against. You know, the greatest ability for law enforcement to stop these things at the source is at the local level. And what President Trump's policies are doing is creating just tremendous distrust between local communities and law enforcement, local law enforcement. And it's that local law enforcement, be it New York City, Chicago, Topeka, Kansas, that is the first line of defense in identifying and stopping these terrorists. We need the community to trust them and to feel that they can go talk to them and share information with them. And if you're pushing out policies that breaks that trust, it really does stop that last line of defense that we have. Our intelligence services, the State Department does a really good job, to the best they can, in vetting before they get here. But once they're here, it is a high dependency on local law enforcement, and we need them to be able to work with communities and for communities to feel that they can trust and share information with that local law enforcement.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. We have to leave it there. Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and Yan Shuai, Associate Professor and Executive Chief of Organized Crime Studies at CIR. And my first point, when a person is sick, you need to treat the local infections, but also find and address the source of the problem. Is it unhealthy living, a harmful environment, a genetic problem, or some other underlying situation? The technical means that can be adopted in fighting terrorism is limited and often bypassed by the terrorists who think laterally. There are things in life that can be turned into weapons easily, and no amount of police presence or security measures can protect us 100%. For the U.S. to look into its policies and address the underlying roots of terrorism is crucial and growing in importance. You've been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and stay with us. Shinzo Abe, leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, was re-elected as Japan's 98th Prime Minister on Wednesday in both chambers of the Japanese Parliament. And the fourth Abe cabinet is now being formed. Now, when he won this year's snap election, it paved the way for him potentially to become Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister since World War II. This landslide victory defied expectations and showed him to be one of the most skillful Japanese politicians of the post-war era. But a critical question is, what kind of domestic and foreign policy agenda will he now be pushing? Joining me for the discussion from New York is Dr. Naoko Kumada, a visiting scholar at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute of Columbia University. And from London, we have Dr. Angus Lockyer, a lecturer in Japanese history at SOAS in the University of London. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Kumada, just this year, Abe has been implicated in two successive cronyism scandals involving education institutions. Now, his popularity actually slipped to a record low this summer. Before the snap election, even he himself set a modest target of a simple majority, but the final results gave him a landslide win. How did he make it?
Well, there are many ways he did this. He played many tricks, but I think the biggest reason was that in his campaign he put national crisis at the front, threat from North Korea and the aging and shrinking population. So he created insecurity and fear among the Japanese population, and when the people are faced with that kind of fear, it's difficult for people to vote to other parties, because for a long time the LDP has won people's votes with the faith that in critical times they are the ones who can protect the country. Another reason is that he avoided convening the diet, the extraordinary diet session, even though the opposition had been asking him to convene it. And there's a question of constitutionality in the way he did a snap election. The opposition says that criticize him for calling a snap election immediately after he convened the extraordinary diet session after 3 months of ignoring the opposition's request. So that there are many other reasons too. The Party of Hope unfortunately didn't do so well.
I see. Dr. Lockyer, after all, he has won this super majority. He is now forming his fourth cabinet. What kind of electorate do you think he's faced with, and what are the majority of Japanese people's concerns and aspirations, as that would decide his priorities in his fourth term in office?
Indeed. It's a slightly paradoxical situation, because he's won a landslide, or rather in combination with his coalition partners, Komeito, who are not always on the same page. He's won a landslide, but he himself is not very popular at all, as you mentioned in your introduction. So his mandate seems overwhelming, but maybe limited. He does seem to want to revise the constitution. There seems to be support for this among the Japanese population, but not by him. As Naoko has just mentioned, there's a strong desire for safety and security given the regional instability, especially coming from North Korea. And then there's a series of concerns at home. He wants, and he's promised, to raise the consumption tax, for example, which is not a popular policy, but on the other hand, the Japanese tax burden is very high now in terms of percent of GNP. So there's a kind of catch-22 flavor to the situation he's facing. I'm not sure he has the electoral mandate to do everything he wants to, but on the other hand, he may be able to do more than even he hoped given the uselessness of the opposition in this election.
Dr. Kumada, now, as Dr. Lockyer mentioned, Abe hopes to revise the country's constitution by 2020 in order to formally recognize the military forces. Now that his coalition retained its two-thirds majority in Parliament, lower house, in the election, that seems to have re-energized his push to revise the constitution, and the situation on the Korean Peninsula almost certainly can be used as one of the justifications to do so. Would you say that now the environment is better than ever for him to promote his constitutional revisions?
Yes, I think so. I think one of the reasons he actually called the snap election was to form a strong force to push that goal of amending the constitution. With the popularity dropping before the election, it was very difficult for him to push through his constitutional agenda. And now that he's won a supermajority, I think that he will go for his long wishing goal. Many Japanese know that he has for many years been wanting to amend the constitution, and I think that he will go for it.
Yeah, Dr. Lockyer, now even if an amendment to the Constitution is passed and approved by the Diet, it still needs to be technically put to a public vote in a referendum. Now that the majority of the Japanese public have voted for him and his party, does it mean that the majority of the Japanese public have already voted yes to such revisions?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. The opinion poll surveys at the moment are very interesting. There's beginning to be just the slightest of majorities in favor of constitutional revision, which would, after all, acknowledge the situation, which is that Japan does have an army, does have a navy, is very well equipped militarily. But there's great suspicion, I think, towards Abe and the right in general about the broader purposes behind this. There is a deep-rooted pacifism in Japan now, and there has been for quite a considerable time. And I think Abe is enough of a pragmatist to realize that if constitutional revision were to go to a referendum, where all he would have to do is win a simple majority of the population, still the result of that is in doubt. So it's a tricky call for him, I think.
Dr. Kumada, in 2015 he successfully managed to push for a reinterpretation of the Constitution to allow troops to fight overseas under certain circumstances, which already attracted widespread protest from the Japanese public and neighboring countries, including China and the ROK. What strategies do you think he might adopt to avoid such protests and possible setbacks in his next move?
Well, I think he has already put in place his strategies, which was to pass the controversial anti-terrorist law last. I think it was actually this year. And we see that even though there was a huge protest in 2015, there hasn't been such a large protest since then. He's been increasing control over the media. There's less freedom, press freedom than before. So I am not sure if there'll be large pushback like what we might want to expect from the population. But that said, we also see that there's a new force that emerged from the result of this election, largely the new party, Constitutional Democratic Party, and they, nobody expected that they would become the largest opposition, beating the Party of Hope. So, as Dr. Lockyer said, there is still a large and very strong opposition force, liberal democratic force in Japan. But at the same time, we also see that 80% of the lower house seat is now occupied by the pro-reform, pro-constitutional reform forces. So we will have to observe very carefully where the Japanese public opinion will go.
Yeah, Dr. Lockyer, what would be the consequences for the region if such revisions did go ahead?
It's very difficult to say. I think there's a huge difference between words on a piece of paper, and again, I think constitutional revision is probably going to come at some point. The Constitution is at odds with the facts on the ground, if you like, but I think there's a big difference between words on a piece of paper and then the policies and the strategies that this is linked to, if there is any link indeed. I think the regional situation is evolving, as we've been observing for several years. All of the major players are in transition in one way or another, so it's very difficult to predict. My belief, or my hope, or my wish is that there seems to be a great deal of pragmatism, even in the places one might not find it. There is obviously the question of North Korea and what's going on there, and then the link to the States, which is perhaps the most unpredictable place at the moment. So I don't think there's a necessary way one can see into the future on this. One can hope that even if constitutional revision were to go ahead, this would be within a framework of regional cooperation and understanding, and above all, I'm a historian, so I would say this fervently, a better understanding of history, which I think is still something that needs work on throughout the region, indeed, coming to terms with the past.
Do you think he might have some kind of a new attitude towards the issue of recognition of Japan's wartime crimes that it committed, that country committed in some parts of Asia? This has been the issue that has been grappling many countries in this region. Do you think there will be any new developments over there under Abe in the fourth term? Dr. Lockyer?
One can hope so. I don't know if this will happen under Abe. I think Abe has a very deep personal investment here. He has a grandfather who was caught up in the events and on the wrong side of them in many cases. He has visited Yasukuni. He is of a particular persuasion within the LDP. But I think that it's important that there be a frank acknowledgement. I think that there have been efforts in this direction in the past from other prime ministers, but still a line needs to be drawn, and the history needs to be written, frankly.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Dr. Angus Lockyer at the University of London and Dr. Naoko Kumada at Columbia University. And here is my last point. Even if Abe successfully revised the pacifist constitution of Japan, is that the key to solving the stagnation and other issues facing the country in the long term? That is still a question. To try and contain China as a rival, or to form regional alliances targeting China instead of seeking a harmonious coexistence, Abe's personal political gains might spell loss in Japan's national interest. Understanding and addressing the main contradictions of the time could make Abe not just the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan, but also one who really made a positive impact in history. That's it for this edition of The Point. Before I go, here's how you can get your stories, comments and videos aired on our program. We'll launch a special show on World Poverty Reduction in mid-November, and we need your input. When you hear the word poverty, what comes to your mind? If you have a question to ask, a comment to make, or a story to tell, send them to me via thepointwithalex@cgtn.com, or share it on your Facebook or Twitter account using the hashtag #PovertyAndUs. Remember to tag me at thepointwithalex. Thanks for watching. Look at The Point.